Dear student, I am Dr. 𝗓𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵, a professor in biochemistry. So in this video, I will be explaining you all about vitamin E. Let's get into that. Vitamin E, it is the nature's most potent and most abundant biological antioxidant. One of the important role of vitamin E in our body is it simply acts as an antioxidant and it protects our cell membrane from what is called as lipid peroxidation. I am going to explain you what exactly is the lipid peroxidation and how exactly vitamin E, it helps in lipid peroxidation, prevention of lipid peroxidation process. In fact, vitamin E, it is previously called as anti-sterility factor. Anti-sterility factor means vitamin E, it was helpful in the fertility of animals, although it has not proven to be true for humans, but otherwise that's why the name of vitamin E, it is referred as tocopherol, and tocos means childbirth, pherol means to bear, so child bearing vitamin, that's why the name tocopherol. So it is the most important membrane antioxidants. Always remember this. So a role of vitamin D in our body is it is an antioxidant vitamin. So antioxidant vitamin is importantly the membrane antioxidant because it is going to protect our cell membrane from breakdown process, from lipid peroxidation. Against it is going to fight against reactive oxygen molecules are called as free radicals. It's going to protect our cell membrane from free radicals. Now let's see how many types of vitamin E present in the nature. So around 8 naturally occurring tocopherols are there. In that, the most important tocopherols are α-tocopherol, β-tocopherol, gamma-tocopherol and delta-tocopherol. Out of all these 4 important tocopherol, the most potent tocopherol is α-tocopherol. And so all the information that we are going to see here as we move on in subsequent slides. So we will be concentrating on α-tocopherol's function of vitamin E. And most tocopherols are readily degraded by oxygen and also they are inactivated upon exposure to ultraviolet light. Now let's get into dietary sources, absorption and transport of vitamin E. Vitamin E is coming from vegetable oils and nuts. These are the richest sources of vitamin E for us in the diet is vegetable oils. So whatever the type of vegetable oils that are consumed, so it will have a significant quantity of vitamin E and also the nuts, especially the oil content in the nuts. Now, vitamin E, just like any other fat soluble vitamin, are absorbed along with the dietary lipids which needs the presence of bile acids. That means, so vitamin E, like vitamin A, D and K and dietary lipids, so it needs a micelle formation, and for forming micelle we need bile acids and emulsification process. Emulsification is the coating of bile acids with the lipids and contraction of the intestine where the large lipid molecule broken down into simple lipid coated with the bile acids, which we call it as micelles. So the presence of bile acids, emulsification process helps in the absorption of vitamin E along with other fat soluble vitamins and dietary lipids from our intestine. So as such, efficiency of tocopherol absorption in the intestine is very less, which is about 20 to 40% of dietary tocopherol is absorbed in the intestine. So once tocopherol is absorbed into the enterocytes, in the enterocytes it will be loaded on to ApoB48 protein, and this ApoB48 protein, once it is loaded with vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K and dietary lipids, so that will be converted into chylomicrons, and chylomicrons are carried from the intestine to the liver and it will be offloading all its content to the liver. So what happens to vitamin E in the liver? So vitamin E from the liver, it will be transported out of the liver into the bloodstream by loading it on to VLDL molecule. What is VLDL? VLDL is very low density lipoprotein, and also vitamin E is carried from the liver to peripheral tissues even by binding to erythrocyte membrane. So VLDL and erythrocytes are the transporters of tocopherols from the liver to the peripheral tissues. Now, where exactly this vitamin E is stored in our body? So vitamin E is enriched in lipid-laden structures, and highest concentration of vitamin E found in the fat deposits of adipose tissue. And also note that vitamin E is a membrane antioxidant. That means you are going to find a good concentration of vitamin E present over the cell membrane. Especially it is present over all the long myelinated neurons, especially coming from the spinal cord, like the brain. All the spinal cord, long myelinated neurons present in the spinal cord. So vitamin E has to be present over the myelinated neurons to protect the neuronal membrane against the free radicals attack. And also whenever vitamin E is in excess, especially when it is in excess in the liver, so vitamin E is secreted into biliary canaliculi and then it enters into the duodenum. From the duodenum, it can go out of our body in the feces, because only 20 to 40% of vitamin E is absorbed. So rest is just going out in the feces. That's how vitamin E is excreted out of our body in the feces. Coming to functions of vitamin E. So make sure you remember the most important function of vitamin E is its antioxidant role. It is the first line of defense against over cell membranes against free radicals attack. What is actually the free radical? So the free radical, as it is shown in the figure here, it is the oxygen deficient molecule, and this oxygen deficient free radical, since it has got deficiency in the oxygen, it has got one electron deficient in its outer orbit, so it is most unstable. So what it does, it is going to attack our cell membrane to gain that electron and damage the cell membrane, leading to lipid peroxidation. So what tocopherol will do? Alpha tocopherol, since it has got electrons, it's going to donate that electron to this free radical and keep it in a reduced state, and that is what is shown here. So the alpha tocopherol, it is going to give electrons to this R star, which is a free radical there, and it is going to convert that into RH, and RH is a stable molecule. Okay, so we have a free radical intermediate of alpha tocopherol because it has lost its electron. So and basically it is keeping all these free radicals in their reduced state and converted into quinone intermediate, and this quinone intermediate has to be converted back into alpha tocopherol, and that will be helped by other antioxidants like ascorbate, that is vitamin C, which act as an antioxidant, or glutathione, which is a cellular antioxidant, which is rich in protons like SH group, that is glutathione is this one, GSH is the glutathione, this H can be donated. So like this, quinone intermediate of tocopherol can be converted back into alpha tocopherol, so that alpha tocopherol levels can be maintained in our over the cell membrane. Otherwise, if it is not reduced back into alpha tocopherol, so the quinone intermediate can simply go into inactive products. Okay, so like this, so alpha tocopherol acting as a membrane antioxidant, it is going to protect our cell membrane from free radicals. So alpha tocopherol is the most potent scavenger of reactive oxygen species, while the gamma tocopherol is the most potent scavenger of reactive nitrogen species. So before I move on to the next slide, let me explain you what exactly is the lipid peroxidation and how alpha tocopherol present over the lipid membrane is going to help in prevention of membrane damage. So our cell membrane, it has a lipid bilayer. I am going to write a lipid bilayer membrane here, just a few of them. So that means it has a polar head, that is phosphate head. I am writing head is, that is phosphate, and two tails here. Two tails is it is the fatty acid tail. So, let me now add reactive oxygen species, that is O2 dot. O2 dot. This is the superoxide which is deficient in electron, and this superoxide, it is going to attack the cell membrane, especially this fatty acid. It is going to attack it and it's going to gain electrons from it. Electrons are removed so that superoxide is stabilized, and now this particular fatty acid which is losing electron, it is going to attack the neighboring fatty acid and get that electron from there, and that will attack a neighboring fatty acid, get electrons. So, whenever a fatty acid is losing electrons because it is taken out by the other unstable molecule, so this kind of peroxidation, there is an oxidation going on. A fatty acid is undergoing oxidation and it's a chain of event going on here over the membrane. So, one fatty acid is attacking another fatty acid and taking out those electrons, which is initiated by this superoxide. So, this type of oxidation we call it as lipid peroxidation, and this lipid peroxidation can lead to membrane damage, and it depends on which cell or membrane is damaged. If the RBC membrane is damaged, so it can lead to increase in the permeability of RBC cell membrane, and that leads to RBC lysis, and RBC lysis leads to release of hemoglobin out of the cell, and that can lead to decrease in hemoglobin level and all the consequences. Like this, any cell membrane can be damaged by this lipid peroxidation. How to prevent it? So, there comes vitamin E. So, vitamin E, which is a membrane antioxidant, it will be present over the cell membrane. So, what it does, whenever superoxide comes in, so it is going to donate electrons to this superoxide, and thereby it is going to neutralize the superoxide and prevent attack of superoxide over the cell membrane, and thereby vitamin E is going to prevent lipid peroxidation, and by preventing lipid peroxidation it can prevent RBC lysis, or it can prevent membrane damage to any of our cells, and that's where is the function of vitamin E lysine. Let's look at the functions of vitamin E. So, vitamin E function is there in the anti-atherogenic role. Means vitamin E, it prevents atherosclerosis process. What it does, it is going to decrease LDL oxidation. Whenever low density lipoprotein in the blood vessel, in the lumen of the blood vessel, whenever it is oxidized, what it does, this oxidized LDL is going to damage the endothelium of the blood vessel, and it will gain access into the tunica intima, that is a subintimal space of the endothelial, just beneath the endothelium in the blood vessel, and it will go on accumulating there, and that oxidized LDL are taken up by the macrophages and engulfing all these oxidized LDLs there. Macrophages will become foam cells, and that initiates atherosclerosis process. So, all this atherosclerosis process can be simply prevented by vitamin E by preventing LDL oxidation. Once the LDL oxidation is prevented, so atherosclerosis can be taken care, and that's where vitamin E comes in as prevention of cardiovascular diseases, and that is done in the presence of vitamin E. Only thing that we need to be careful here is supplementing excess vitamin E in cardiovascular disease patients. It can lead to potentiation of blood thinning effects of vitamin E. So, because patients with cardiovascular diseases, they may be at they may be using a blood thinning medication called 𝗪𝐾umarol or warfarin. So, giving excess doses of vitamin E in patients who are already on blood thinning medication like 𝗪𝐾umarol or warfarin can actually potentiates the blood thinning effect of this medication in the presence of vitamin E, and that means blood becomes too thin and it can lead to hemorrhages, and that can actually lead to death. So, we got to be careful whenever we supplement vitamin E, especially in patients who are on blood thinning medication like 𝗪𝐾umarol or warfarin. And also selenium, supplementation of selenium can alleviate some of the symptoms of vitamin E deficiency, because selenium, it is part of one of our enzyme which is involved in neutralizing hydrogen peroxide, and the name of the enzyme is glutathione reductase. Glutathione reductase enzyme, which contains selenium. It's a selenium containing enzyme, and supplementation of selenium will improve the glutathione reductase enzyme activity. Thereby, it will decrease reactive oxygen species, and thereby some of the effects of free radicals can be decreased, and that's how symptoms improvement may be seen. Vitamin E, it is going to boost immune response. It's going to protect red blood cells from hemolysis. It keeps the structural integrity of all cells, and also vitamin E, it slows the aging process. These are other functions of vitamin E. And also, other than this, vitamin E, it is going to stabilize ubiquinone, and ubiquinone, it is coenzyme Q. Coenzyme Q is ubiquinone, which is one of the mobile complex in the electron transport chain. Mobile complex in the electron. So, ubiquinone is stabilized by a good concentration of tocopherol, alpha-tocopherol. And also vitamin E, it is helpful in transcription and maintenance of delta-amino levulinic acid synthase enzyme, and it will be helpful in the synthesis of hemoglobin. So, these are some of the functions of vitamin E here. Now, let us move on to see what are the causes for vitamin E deficiency. So, dietary deficiency of vitamin E does not exist. It's because it is plentiful in vegetable oils and nuts. So, consumption of vegetable oils will give a sufficient vitamin E levels for us. So, only whenever we have consuming diets rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids, it may increase the demand for vitamin E, because consumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids simply increases the chances of attack by free radicals, and lipid peroxidation chances increases by having higher levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the cell membrane, and during that time, so vitamin E has to be present at good concentration. And so other than this, so severe and prolonged fat malabsorptive disorders, this is the cause for vitamin E deficiency. So whenever a person goes into vitamin E deficiency, most likely it is because that person may have fat malabsorptive disorders. What are the fat malabsorptive disorders that we know? It is celiac disease, or it can be a small intestinal resection, or it can be cystic fibrosis, where exocrine pancreas is not working properly and pancreatic secretions are not coming into the intestinal lumen, or it may be because of A-beta lipoproteinemia. A-beta lipoproteinemia means beta lipoprotein, that is ApoB48 and ApoB100. These proteins are not synthesized. That means chylomicron synthesis and VLDL synthesis will be decreased. So that means transport of vitamin E from the intestine to the liver is affected, because chylomicrons are not synthesized, and transport of vitamin E from liver to the peripheral tissues is also affected. So that means in A-beta lipoproteinemia, there will be severe vitamin E deficiency compared to any other fat soluble vitamin deficiency. So that's one of the important cause for vitamin E deficiency. Now let's move on to see what are the deficiency manifestations of vitamin E. So all the deficiency manifestations of vitamin E, for that matter, you can connect it to a single function of vitamin E, and that is antioxidant role of vitamin E present over the cell membrane. Because vitamin E being present over cell membrane, it acts as a first line of defense against membrane lipid peroxidation. So whenever there is a vitamin E deficiency, all these cell membranes may not be protected properly, and that may lead to increased lipid peroxidation over these membrane. Lipid peroxidation is increased, and when the lipid peroxidation is increased over different cell membranes, these cells functions may go down. So If this happens in the neurons, when the lipid peroxidation is going on over the neurons, it can give rise to peripheral neuropathy. Imagine long myelinated neurons in the spinal cord all along the tract. The membrane need to be protected, and that protection has to be done as a first line of defense by having sufficient vitamin E. So, if the vitamin E deficiency is there, that can actually lead to demyelination of the neuron or neuronal degeneration process, and thereby affecting peripheral neuropathy. What are the peripheral neuropathy signs? So, patients may show decrease in the sensation, especially in the distal limbs. That is decrease in the vibration sense, touch, temperature, pressure, all that kind of ataxia can be seen, like incoordination of the movement. So, if it happens on the red blood cell membrane, if the lipid peroxidation is increased over red blood cell membrane, it will lead to breaking open of red blood cell, and hemoglobin will be released out, leading to hemolytic anemia. That is one of the sign of vitamin E deficiency. If it happens over the muscle cells, skeletal muscle cells, so it can give rise to skeletal myopathy. Even like skeletal muscle can break open, and that will release myoglobin out of the skeletal muscle, and that leads to myoglobinuria, skeletal myopathy, and degeneration of myelinated axons, that is the spinal cord. The spinal cord neurons are affected here. So, degeneration of myelinated axons, and that can give rise to ataxia and other neurological signs that you see in vitamin E deficiency. If it happens onto the retina, retinal cell membrane, if it is lipid peroxidation is going on there, it can lead to pigmented retinopathy. So, here in vitamin E deficiency, it is a collection of signs, and almost all of these signs is connected to one thing, and that is increase in lipid peroxidation because of lack of vitamin E over the cell membrane. And because the myelinated neurons are affected, giving rise to peripheral neuropathy, ataxia, decrease in the motor and sensory functions of the neurons, it can be confusing with the other neurological conditions. That is why we need to look for if there is any vitamin E deficiency, if you see any neurological issues along with hemolytic anemia, skeletal myopathy, pigmented retinopathy. If you see these additional features along with the neurological issues, you think about vitamin E, especially if it is associated with any fat malabsorptive disorder like cystic fibrosis, A-beta lipoproteinemia, resection of the small intestine. Along with that reason, if there is a peripheral neuropathy, hemolytic anemia, skeletal myopathy signs are there, along with this any fat malabsorptive disorders, it is surely vitamin E deficiency there. Coming to hypervitaminosis E. What is hypervitaminosis E here? Hypervitaminosis E is excess vitamin E intake. High doses of vitamin E, if it is taken more than the normal allowed intake, that is 400 international unit per day. So, excess vitamin E can depress coagulability, that means clotting of the blood, because vitamin E, it potentiates the blood thinning effect, that means coagulation may be decreased. So, patients with bleeding disorders and those receiving warfarin, 𝗪𝐸𝐴, they should be cautioned against the use of vitamin E, especially in excess doses. So, we got to be judicious when we are prescribe vitamin E supplementation to patients who are on blood thinning medication like warfarin or 𝗪𝐸𝐴. So, otherwise, other than this, like other than blood thinning effect of vitamin E in higher doses, compared to all other fat soluble vitamins, vitamin E is the least toxic of all fat soluble vitamin, even at 50 times the recommended intake. So, there is no any toxic effects have been reported. So, this is all about vitamin E. So, we have covered most of the points related to vitamin E, especially with sources, digestion, absorption, transport, functions, and so the deficiency manifestations of vitamin E and also hypervitaminosis E. That's all about vitamin E. Thank you.